Today, we're going to look at how a single voice can rise above the noise of injustice. This isn't just a biography, it's a deep dive into the very architecture of courage and what it really means to lead.
You know, when we think about big historical changes, we usually picture these huge, sweeping events. Massive armies, right? Big revolutions. But that's not always how it happens. Sometimes the most powerful shifts start with something much, much smaller.
Just one person. One person who decides that enough is enough, that silence just isn't an option anymore. And that's where things really start to change. So, we're going to unpack the story of someone who really embodies that idea. This isn't about power that's handed down, it's about courage that's earned. This is Hadi's story.
So where does a story like this even begin? To really get the leader, you have to first understand the person. And it all started not with a loud declaration, but with a simple question.
See, Hadi wasn't born into some fancy political family. Not at all. His world was one where hardship was just normal. And being that close to the everyday struggle, it gave him a clarity, a perspective that people in power almost never have. And that perspective, right from a young age, it made him ask questions. He'd look around and see things that just didn't add up, and he wasn't afraid to wonder why. Starting with the biggest question of all.
He just saw the world for what it was, completely unbalanced. He saw fortunes being made in the shadows while people were suffering right out in the open, and he just couldn't bring himself to accept it.
And finally, he asked this: why does everyone else just put up with it? See, these are the questions that really made him different. Most people just accept the world as it is, but the ones who dare to ask why, well, they're the ones who end up changing it. While all that questioning was bound to lead somewhere, and it led to his first real stand. Because, it's one thing to ask these questions in your own head. It's a whole other thing to say them out loud when no one else will.
And let's be clear, Hadi knew exactly what was at stake. This wasn't some naive decision. He knew the price of speaking out. There would be threats. He'd be isolated. There was a very real risk he could lose everything.
And this quote right here, it tells you everything about where his courage came from. It wasn't that he didn't feel fear, of course he did. It's that he mastered it. He understood that real courage isn't being fearless, it's acting anyway, because freedom is just that much more important. In a world that runs on money and influence, Hadi's greatest weapon was something you can't buy, something so much more powerful: his honesty. He would rather lose the fight than twist the truth. And that integrity, that became his armor.
You know, every leader has that one moment, that trial by fire that really defines them. For Hadi, that moment was a period of absolute chaos, a time known simply as July.
The whole thing played out right there, on the streets.
The air was just filled with the sounds of chaos.
It was a raw, brutal, and very real struggle.
But in that chaos, when so many others backed down or ran away, Hadi stood firm. That moment didn't break him, it forged him. The fire didn't destroy him, it turned him into a warrior and proved to everyone that he was a real leader.
Okay, so what kind of leader actually came out of that fire? It wasn't the kind you might expect. Hadi's authority came from a totally different place, a new language of leadership.
Let's break this down because it's so important. This is leadership based on empathy, on connection, not on fear. He listens to actually understand what people are saying, not just to wait for his turn to talk. He figures out the situation before he tells anyone what to do. And maybe the biggest thing, he stands with people, not out in front of them. That's how you build real, lasting trust.
And this quote, this just perfectly sums it all up. It totally flips the old idea of power on its head. For Hadi, leadership isn't about climbing to the top of the pyramid. It's about getting down on the ground right next to people. It's about service, not about status.
And because of this completely different way of leading, something incredible started to happen. Hadi the person started to become Hadi the symbol. He grew into something bigger than just one man. He became the embodiment of people's hopes. So what does that symbol actually stand for? Well, for young people, he's what courage looks like. For people who've been ignored and pushed down, he's someone they can finally trust. And for everyone, he represents the promise that a better future is actually possible. So what's the big idea we can take away from all this? His story really gives us a whole new way to define what an ideal leader is. It suggests that leadership isn't about the title you have, but the stand you're willing to take. It's not about who sits in the seat of power, but about who stands up with the people on the front lines.
And that leaves us with this one last powerful thought. Every single major change in history, every time a great wrong was righted, it all started with one simple, brave act. Someone standing up and just saying no. Hadi's story is a reminder that protest isn't the chaotic end of the story, it is the very beginning of change.